Hi, everyone. Um, I'm Gaby Minnes Brandes. I've been teaching Alexander technique for over 30 years. I live in Vancouver. And when I think about my practice, I realize that I work a lot with musicians and with performers. And I was curious about that. And then when I was asked to add to the blog of Alexander Studies Online and write about working with musicians, I paused and realized that actually I have lots of experience with that. So I'm delighted to start this set of interviews with Jennifer Condie, who is a pianist and a student of mine. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for agreeing to participate and dance this dance with me. And would you like to say anything about who you are, your background, and then we'll jump into it?
I'm a piano teacher of over 30 years, working with a wide range of students from beginners right through students who are preparing to enter university. And I have a music degree, a Bachelor of Music from UBC, and have continued to explore music and the playing and the teaching over the duration of that time, with Alexander technique being something I've been exploring the last 10 years with Gaby.
So thanks. So do you remember what prompted you to pick up the phone or send an email and say that you're interested in lessons?
Primarily, it was that while I'd had the privilege of having some really wonderful teachers who taught me a lot about piano technique, I was still experiencing some discomfort in my forearms. I knew I wasn't releasing the way I needed to. And I knew that I didn't understand how my body worked as a whole. And because I knew that was affecting my piano technique. The other piece that made me go to Alexander technique is I knew that you learned to apply what you were doing with Alexander technique in your everyday life. And at that point, my life was really crowded, and I wanted a way to help myself grow without putting undue pressure on myself. And so it was also that was part of the fit, as well as my desire to really understand again how everything worked so that I could give my students the best possible learning.
So we started lessons. And at what point could you see a connection between the lessons and music making or piano playing? Or do you remember first steps of what it was like to start with these concepts?
Well, I remember leaving my first lesson and feeling like I was floating. It was a great sensation. And then I started thinking about it right away. But of course, at the beginning, at the very, very beginning, it took a little bit of time before I could feel applications. But very early on, I think it was something you told me about one of your students who had, or it was something you did where you sit on your palms and find your sit bones and have them go straight down to the floor. So very early, I started thinking about how my pelvis was in relationship to my back on the bench. And I worked at thinking about my neck. But of course, I certainly went back to my habit a lot. But I remember noticing the sit bones, the change in my pelvis. And I know it changed a fair amount early on because very early on, I stopped having the sore spot in my spine that was always there. And the other thing that happened very early on that I noticed, it isn't specifically piano, but told me that I was having some change, was that I couldn't, before I took Alexander technique lessons, I had a trick knee and I couldn't like crouch down to get things out of the dryer. And all of a sudden I could go down, I could crouch. And so there were definitely changes that were really obvious. The force of habit in piano playing and observing more, but still finding it difficult to really be different when I was playing is part of what I remember at the beginning.
Great. And now so many years of lessons. Can you speak a little bit about how you apply Alexander technique in your life and in piano playing?
Well, in piano playing, I'm so happy to say that my habit of pulling my low back in is way less. And I've also got like my piano, my approach to the piano had already changed a lot when I started lessons. Like I had started with a very collapsed spine and my head really far out. And then in reaction to that, I had got too straight with pulled in. And I'd say now I am much more able to keep a balanced way of sitting at the piano. And partly because of that, well, mostly because of that, my shoulder girdle is much freer, and I'm not getting tight when I play. I don't finish practicing and end up all knotted up, which I was before. Like I remember before I took lessons, every night after I taught, I'd go see my husband and he'd be massaging my shoulders because I was so tight. I never asked for him to massage my shoulders anymore. So I know that those things have meant a lot of change. I also feel that my way of playing, that my release into the keys is much more natural. Before, I think I was always using a certain amount of pressure in my forearm, and that has changed a lot. Although I think those kind of things, it's degrees of change, and I'm sure there's many more degrees of change that can be found. I also am much more able to sense my sit bones and adjust how I'm balancing my weight and come back to a center balance place than I was. And that makes me more comfortable at the keyboard. And I've even been experimenting lately because we did some work on spirals, and I took this course with Anita, who talked about spirals. Gaby, you sent me to the course with Anita King, which I enjoyed. And learning to use the spiral movement to adjust how I'm approaching the keyboard again when I'm at an extremity. That's another option. I think now I'm understanding more about how Alexander technique gives me more options. It's not that I have to be in one place or hold one position, but how I find those movements can be better directed, and I can keep coming back to my home base and enjoy moving, but in a different way. And so that awareness has developed over time.
And so, great, thank you. And in your daily life and not in your piano life?
Oh, it's really different, because the biggest thing I notice in my daily life is if I inadvertently do something not so great and I hurt myself, I'm much more able to adjust how I move and get myself moving, like working nicely again, working comfortably again, and not sort of go deep into the tension and make it worse. So I find that I can fix things a lot better when I've changed how I cut vegetables. I use I used to always cut with one hand and do all these funny things. I'm more likely to use my cutting board now and not contort myself and contort my hands to do it. I'm trying to think what else. I crouch all the time. It's great. I enjoy standing on one leg with the yoga pose because I can actually do it. Gardening is still a bit of an issue. I still tend to hurt myself when I garden. I think I don't pay enough attention. I'm sure I don't. But that's improved as well. So I think I just have more options about my movement, and I'm less likely to injure myself. And if I do injure myself, I'm able to move differently, and most of the time resolve without any additional support.
So to use Alexander lingo, you're describing lots of occasions of directing and inhibiting and connecting these two into your daily activities through awareness, through growing awareness of how you move and where you are in space. Am I saying things that resonate with you?
Wonderfully, yes. That's exactly right.
All right, so thank you for this segment. And we'll take a moment and then we'll move to part 2, where we'll talk about teaching.